Good morning, everybody. This is Rebekah Lewin. I am the Assistant Dean for Admissions and Student Engagement at the University of Rochester Simon Business School. I'm pleased to be presenting today with Meet the GMAT. We have a webinar for about the next hour or so that's going to talk about scholarships, grants, loans, and some tips for financing your MBA studies, which I would imagine is a huge topic in your mind, whether you have already hit submit on your applications or you're feverishly still working on applications or shortlists for schools, or even just beginning the research process of even considering an MBA degree. So we'll discuss some things today that have shorter lead times for those of you that are thinking about 2014, as well as things that you can be thinking about for your future if you're not quite sure of a timeline for pursuing your MBA. The intent today is to give an overview and then to take questions. So I would expect that we're going to probably have at least 20 or maybe even 30 minutes for questions. We'll try to keep questions to a more general nature about both the financial aid as well as admissions. I have had expertise in both of those areas. So just a little bit about myself before we start talking about the topic. As I said, I'm with the University of Rochester in Rochester, New York, and have been with the business school for 15 years, working in admissions for the MBA and master's programs, primarily in full-time admissions, but I also have some part-time admissions experience. And I'm also a board member for both the Forte Foundation and the Consortium for Graduate Study and Management. So a lot of deep industry expertise and contacts. And so while some of the conversation today will be about University of Rochester, a lot of it will be about the industry and about industry norms. And so that comes from conversations with my peers at other top business schools and just a deep knowledge from working within the business school admissions and financial aid sector for so many years. And so, like I said, we are going to talk a little bit about how to fund your MBA study. I will be focusing more on full-time MBA opportunities and the types of financial aid that are available, and some specifics related to scholarships and grants as well as loans. We'll talk very specifically about how do you go about accessing that funding, because you don't want to just know about it, you want to know about how you can get it for you. We'll talk a little bit about the Simon Business School and scholarship opportunities and other financing opportunities specifically for the business school here. We'll talk a little bit about what your next steps should be for 2014, and then we'll go through some questions. We will take questions through the chat, and so while I will give some prompts as we get toward the end of the conversation, you're welcome at any point during the conversation that you have questions. You can push them into the chat, and we'll get to as many of them as we can today. So for those of you who are funding your MBA degree, there's a number of different things that you can be thinking about that will help to make your financial prospects of quitting your job and going to business school something that can be affordable. There are a great deal of opportunities for funding through various school sources. Most schools set aside a budget. In many, many cases, it's a several $1-million budget. Of course, that's somewhat proportionate to the size of the school student body that a program is enrolling each year. But suffice to say that most schools have some sources of funding, some of it through donations and grants that they've obtained through organizations or through their alumni network or friends network or even corporate partners, that is set aside specifically to recruit students into their program. And so most of these scholarships are going to be merit scholarships. Merit scholarships are scholarships that are based on your profile as a candidate. Some of them are very, very detailed and maybe for, female candidates or candidates that are finance majors. Some of them may be more general and may be scholarships that are, for a deserving student that's identified by the admissions committee. But those scholarships are different than what students might consider from their undergraduate experience, which is need-based funding. There's not a lot of schools out there that do need-based financial aid or need-based scholarships. There may be a few schools, and like I said, I can't speak specific to every single organization out there, but I would say on the whole, more schools are offering the merit scholarships. And so that's going to look at your your student profile relative to other candidates that are being admitted. So kind of like the admissions process, where they're looking at your profile, both the objective and the subjective areas of your application, and how do you compare to other people that are being admitted. And that's probably how a scholarship decision would be made. Some schools are also offering graduate assistantships, and how those assistantships are awarded varies by school. Sometimes they're awarded when you first start school. Sometimes they're awarded partway through your program based on your GPA or other criteria. But a graduate assistantship usually requires work in exchange for some sort of compensation, whereas a scholarship typically does not require any sort of work other than submitting your application, and maybe in some cases also submitting a supplemental scholarship application. But it doesn't require any sort of ongoing work for you once you're enrolled in that school's program. There's actually also a lot of sources for private funding that may be available, and this does require a little bit more legwork on your part than the school sources of funding. There's grants and scholarships that private foundations and corporations and even sometimes nonprofit organizations will offer, and these can vary from a few $100s to thousands and thousands of dollars. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you can research some of these opportunities. But again, this is going to require a little bit more research and legwork on your part to look into the qualifications, because what you'll find is these private sources of funding are much more likely to require very, very specific criteria for you to even apply. Whereas merit scholarships, pretty much anybody can tick the box and complete an application to be considered for scholarships from a school. The private funding sources, they may require a certain race or ethnicity, or they may require a certain undergraduate major, or a certain GPA, or a certain post-MBA career plan. You know, they can be very nuanced in terms of what the criteria are. And so you're going to have to really dig to find ones that might be a good fit for your profile. For full-time MBA students, loans are also a reality of funding your studies. There's governmental loans for U.S. citizens. There's also private loans for U.S. citizens. There may also be some loans for international students. Sometimes that's through your home country. Sometimes that might be through the school that you've applied to, where there's no cosigner loans or even cosigner loans that might be available. And then for most students, personal funds are also going to be part of the way that you're funding your studies. And so now's a great time to start planning a budget and getting serious about your personal finances, maybe one of your New Year's resolutions, and that can be a great way to make sure that you're mitigating the amount of debt you need to incur while you're in graduate school. I will mention some of the differences for part-time MBA students, only just as a counterpoint, but the majority of the rest of my conversation today is going to be on full-time programs. Part-time students, they typically may have employee benefits that may help to cover a portion of their graduate school studies. And then again, similar to full-time students, they may also access loans and or their own personal finances to help fund their studies. They're typically continuing to work and, of course, earning that income while they're in business school. So scholarships, let's talk a little bit more about scholarships, because that is a source of school funding. They are merit-based and they're competitive. I get a lot of questions from students about the psychology around, do I tick the box to say I'm interested in the scholarship? Is that going to impact my chances for admission? You know, maybe I shouldn't apply because I'll be a stronger candidate to be admitted. You can check with the school, but in most cases that admission and scholarship decision are not going to be linked. You know, if a school is linking the decision, typically they are going to disclose that so that you're aware. You do want to make sure that you're checking with the school on whether or not they have a separate application process or what sort of details are required to be considered. For some schools, it can be as simple as just ticking the box to say you're interested. Some schools require a supplemental essay or a supplemental application. But basically, a scholarship is going to reduce the cost of your tuition. It's a reduction in what you would consider the MSRP for a program. It could be a percentage of your tuition. It could be a dollar amount, depending on how a school makes that award. And they may call it a scholarship. They may call it a fellowship. But it's essentially money that reduces the cost of your tuition. And so you can get some gauge from a school as to their level of funding by some of the information that they may have on their website. They may have information about the average award or what percentage of students are awarded or the range of awards. That's all good information for you to know when you're applying, because it can give you a sense of your likelihood of being considered for an award, if you're admitted, or even what other sort of budgeting you're going to need to, and financial resources you're going to need to access to be able to make business school a reality for yourself. And so those are good questions to ask, and there's a plethora of information out there that should help you to have at least a gauge as to the scholarship opportunities that are available. Graduate assistantships, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. Like I said, these are programs that require some sort of work or service. They do vary by school. They could be a first-year commitment, a second-year commitment, or both. Sometimes they require a special skill set or a focus on a particular academic discipline. If you're doing research work or you're doing maybe some sort of administrative support, working with faculty. Some of them are departmental graduate assistantships where you're working, say, in an admissions office or a career management center. And so that may be more based on a skill set than it is on academic discipline. They most likely require a certain GPA threshold in order to maintain your work involvement. It's probably a part-time sort of work, maybe 10, at most 20 hours a week. And like I said, more likely to be a second-year commitment, but there are some schools out there that may also have it be a first-year commitment. One of the things, and you're going to hear this from me probably more than once today, is that, as is the case with a lot of the realities of life, if you wait until the last minute, you may miss out. So you definitely want to look at the timelines and deadlines. They aren't just recommended filing dates. They really are based on a school needing to work within budgets that they've had set. And so you really do need to make sure you're applying early or at least by the deadline indicated for funding to maximize your chances. There are times when a school may have a reserve that is available for later rounds, but it's typically smaller, both in terms of proportion and in terms of, in terms of the amount of funding you can be expecting, and also in terms of the percentage of students that may be qualifying in the later rounds. Educational loans, we'll talk a little bit about this. For U.S. citizens and U.S. permanent residents, there is a federal direct loan program that offers $20,500 per year, pretty competitive interest rates, and as long as you are not in default from undergraduate loans or any other graduate school loans, it's pretty likely that that's considered guaranteed funding for you. That could be used toward any of your educational expenses. And so most schools will have a budget that includes both your average living costs as well as your tuition costs. And that will be a budget of funds that can either be scholarships or loans or other grants that packaged together would help to cover your costs of school. Because with many schools, overall cost well into the six figures, the average student is looking at, a combination of their own resources as well as many other sources of funding to make this all work. There also are private loans that are available to help cover the full cost of attendance, and again, many students are using a combination of both the federal direct loan program as well as private loans to be able to fund the cost of their studies. Many of these private loans will require a credit check, and so again, this is a great time, if you haven't already been doing so, paying your bills on time, consolidating your debt, getting your financial house in order so that you can maximize both your credit score and your credit worthiness, as well as your ability to qualify for a more competitive interest rate for these private loans. In some cases, the loans may require a cosigner. If you have a spotty credit history, you may still be able to get funding, but it may require a cosigner. So keep that in mind, just because that's not a last-minute conversation you want to have with somebody, that it would be a significant commitment for somebody to make, even if they trust the value of you pursuing an MBA degree and what that's going to do for your financial future. it's still something that you want to be planning for. For international students, there are some opportunities, but they're different than the opportunities for U.S. citizens. So there are some loans out there that you can access without a cosigner for a portion or all of the cost of your attendance. Some of those loans are going to be available through a school or through a school's relationship with a financial institution, whether it be a credit union or a bank that they have developed some sort of a partnership or relationship with. And so you'll want to look at each school that you're applying to and try to understand those details. Every single school is different. I can't give you a usual sort of scenario because for each school it's different. And in most cases, a school is underwriting part of the risk of offering a no cosigner loan. And so with that comes their own set of stipulations in terms of how they'll consider international students for that loan. There are also loans that you can pursue as an international student if you have a U.S. citizen or resident serving as a cosigner. It probably goes without saying, but I will say it anyhow, that you need to have a credit-worthy U.S. citizen or resident serving as a cosigner. So again, not a quick conversation to have with somebody about their interest in serving in that capacity. It's something where you definitely want to make sure that they understand what you're asking of them and that they are in a place financially to be able to take that on. Many international students also will find that there's loans through their home country bank or their government. Absolutely something that you should look into because sometimes in comparing interest rates or payback periods and just overall loan terms, there may be a combination of several of these things for a student to consider, more than one option, and you want to find the one that's best for you financially. There's also a few other ways for funding your studies that students may or may not have on their radar, but I'll mention them just so that you can be thinking about them. Because if at the very least it's something that's going to help with your living expenses during your program, maybe not your tuition costs, but possibly your living expenses. One is internships. A lot of students pursue a 2-year MBA intentionally because they want to take the summer between their first and their second year to do an internship. These are typically paid internships. You're typically hired based on skills and prior work experience and the fact that you're pursuing an MBA at a top business school. And so that is something, again, that can help to defray some of your second-year living expenses and possibly even some of your tuition, depending on how lucrative the internship terms are. And what you'll find is that you may not know when you first start business school what that is going to look like, but it is something that, again, may reduce your debt obligation during your second year and how much you have to take in terms of loans if you're carefully budgeting when you get that internship between the first year and the second year. There also are other employment opportunities, such as part-time jobs. These could be on campus or off campus. There could be assistantships through the university, not through your business school, but through the broader university. But you are going to want to evaluate the costs and benefits of taking on other employment. For many students, it's the time versus money trade-off. While the other employment might be able to reduce your debt load or add income, it's definitely going to come at a time cost, and sometimes that time cost can put pressure on you academically and your academic obligations. Sometimes it's going to put time pressure on you in terms of your MBA job search or your ability to be involved in extracurricular activities or leadership opportunities or a study abroad. And so those are all trade-offs that you'll want to consider, and I generally would advise students coming into a full-time MBA not to plan on working right away, especially not during the first year, because a lot of what you do in the first year can set up things nicely in your second year if you have a job offer when you come back from your internship that you're really excited about. And so sometimes making the investment in the first year in the decisions you're making can really position you in the second year to determine if you want to maybe take on some sort of a part-time job. Sometimes these jobs are great and they're directly related to what you want to do after business school. Sometimes it's just a job to earn some money. So again, there's trade-offs with each of those sorts of scenarios as well in terms of really what's in your best interest, not just for your immediate financial goals, but toward your reason for pursuing a full-time MBA in the first place, which is in many cases to do something different than what you did before you came to business school. And if that's the case, you want to make sure that you're investing the appropriate amount of time so that you're ready and available for interviews and for networking and on-campus corporate presentations and all of those other things. And if you've taken on a job on or off campus that's requiring significant time out of the classroom, what you may be finding is that you're limiting your ability to access all of those other opportunities, which would really be helping you toward your future career goals. So where to start? Like I said, this isn't just about telling you what's available, but giving you some action items that you can plan for as you're putting together your future goals over the next and objectives over the next few weeks and months, or possibly even year, depending on your timeline for business school. So the first is to research the timing for school admissions and scholarship decisions. Like I said, applying early or at least by the deadline is super, super important. A lot of the schools will tie your admissions application deadline into the availability of funding. So take a look at what the application deadlines are and whether or not that's specifically linked to a financial aid or scholarship deadlines. And do that early, because that's going to help set you up for what your overall timelines are for applications, or if you're still planning on applying for schools for 2014 into the winter and spring, maybe shortlist, if scholarships and financial aid is a priority, we'll shortlist the schools that will still consider you for funding into the spring, because some may not. And so, you know, that might be a part of your strategy and your priority of school choice if maximizing scholarships is part of your priority for the business schools that you want to consider. Number two, once you've finalized MBA applications, then you want to start looking at outside funding. So if you've already finalized your applications, here's a great opportunity. You have all this nervous energy while you're waiting to get interview invitations, while you're waiting to hear back from schools. How about channeling some of that nervous energy and all this newfound time that you have and doing some research on outside funding? You may find it's a few $100s, a few $1,000s, but that could be time well spent in helping to reduce your debt load. And so that's something that requires just some time. In most cases there's not any sort of a financial cost to apply for this funding. If there is, I would be nervous as to the legitimacy of it. But there might be some outside organizations that you can identify, and then it's taking a look at what are their deadlines. Do they require you to be admitted to a school or even committed to a school and when you are applying? So maybe it's just getting those applications ready to go if you're admitted to the schools prior to those deadlines, or understanding what are the criteria to be considered. And then thirdly, I would say, is getting your finances in order. And so this is a combination of reducing your debt, setting aside savings, and fixing poor credit. And so, there may be people in your life that can help hold you accountable to some of those goals. And some of it doesn't happen overnight. I totally realize that you probably didn't get into that situation overnight, and you're not going to fix it overnight, but there are some things that you probably need to do. Maybe start living like a graduate student the year before you actually begin graduate school, or the year or two before you start going to graduate school. Because not only is the admissions process expensive in terms of application fees and visiting schools and all of that, but you're also going to incur costs for an enrollment deposit if you're admitted to a school. And so all of that's going to come really, really fast once you're admitted, or even once you've applied. And so you want to have a plan in place well before that of how you're going to handle those expenses as they come up. We are winding down. I have probably 2 or 3 more slides. So here's your first call. If you have questions, that you can begin to type them in. And like I said, we will move right into Q&A as soon as I finish. Private sources of funding, like I said, I wanted to give you some actionable items with this as well. So there are grants and scholarships. The criteria are as unique as each organization. Many do stipulate U.S. citizenship and residency. I took a look at some of the websites before I presented today, because I wanted to make sure that I was speaking broadly. And there certainly are some out there that might be for internationals, don't get me wrong, but many of them do require citizenship or residency. So take a look, but a lot of them have other additional criteria, and whether it's your family background or your personal or professional background or your goals, A lot of the times the deadlines for these grants are several months before enrollment. So sometimes it's before you can apply to these organizations before you have an admission offer, but many of them you do need to have an admission offer and even an acceptance of that admission offer so that you can say, I'm going to such and such a school. But the research can be done now to identify those timelines and next steps that will position you to actually finalize those scholarship or grant applications if and once you get the admission offer to the school that you want to go to. The online research that I think is going to be the most useful for you is Peterson's, and so I included the web link here if you'd like to refer to it. They actually have a scholarship search where you can indicate that you're looking for an MBA program and even some other criteria, and then it is going to present you with some different organizations that have funding. There's plenty of other websites out there. The caveat I will give is that some of them are more legitimate than others. If you find an organization where you have to pay money in order to apply or in order to be given a list of available funding options, I would be quite skeptical. Most of the information that you want is probably out there free. Another great resource that I'll just throw out there is that the public library may also be a good resource. There are several very large, what almost appear to be encyclopedia sorts of books that are just scholarship after scholarship after scholarship. Some of them are undergrad, some of them are other areas of graduate school than business, but there are funding options out there to someone who wants to invest time. And like I said, you have nervous energy and you have time right now if you've already finished your application. So put it to good use. For those of you who are in the West or are in most of the areas of the U.S. right now, it's too cold to go outside anyhow, so you might as well go to the library or get online and put your time to good use and hopefully identify some funding for you. So I would be remiss if I didn't at least put in a little plug for University of Rochester and the scholarship opportunities that we have within the business school. And when we take questions, I will take questions generally as well as specific to Simon. So if you have questions specific to Simon funding, let me know. So more than 70% of our MBA students in our full-time programs, our 2-year program, our 1-year program, and our accelerated 18-month MBA program have come in and they're on scholarship. And what does that mean? That could mean $10,000 or $15,000 a year, all the way up to full tuition scholarships. And so, as you would expect, the scholarships at the larger levels, especially full tuition, are competitive, but they are available even for top students. And so, the early bird will get the worm in these cases. We even have a scholarship weekend where we invite a select group of admitted students to come to campus, and they're competing for all of our named scholarships, for our full tuition awards, and even for living stipends. I didn't mention that earlier, but some schools offer living stipends. They may be called different things, but that's basically helping you to pay for your living expenses for business school. The scholarship weekend and all of our largest scholarships require an application to be submitted no later than the middle of February, so you're still within that window of opportunity. But you only have about 5 weeks to get an application finalized. So you would want to move forward sooner rather than later to get that going if you're interested in qualifying for those larger scholarships. And then after mid-February, there are still scholarships, but they're the smaller partial scholarships. So just something to be mindful of. It doesn't mean that it's too late to be considered for funding, but it may not be at the very highest level. Simon does also offer graduate assistantships. These are just for second-year MBA students. They're based on your first-year GPA, working with faculty, and there are also some funding options working with administrative offices, and those are based more on skill sets. So we hire admissions GAs that work in our office. They read applications. They do screening interviews with applicants. They work on social media or at our recruiting events, and so we're looking for a certain skill set and personality profile for those candidates based more on their life and work experiences than just on their academics. We also have a number of scholarship partners. The Consortium for Graduate Study and Management is one of them. As I mentioned, I'm on the board. The consortium is a fantastic organization that's looking to increase the number of underrepresented minorities, African Americans, Native Americans, and Hispanic Americans that are both enrolling in top business schools, as well as who are ultimately joining the ranks of management and business. And so just a fantastic opportunity to do a common application and join a group of top business schools, both for networking opportunities and career opportunities, as well as for scholarship opportunities, partial and full scholarships. We're also a member of Forte, and as I said, I'm also on the board there. And Forte facilitates opportunities for women to enroll in top business schools, and through that enrollment to not only receive partial or full scholarships to attend those schools through selection by the schools as a Forte Fellow, but also great networking opportunities and a special conference that they have for enrolling MBA women. So just some really great opportunities there through those organizations. Very different application processes, so you'd want to look closely at the organization's websites to understand what that process looks like. University of Rochester is also part of the Yellow Ribbon Rochester Pledge program, which is a program for U.S. post 9/11 GI Bill veterans, and it's an opportunity for those individuals essentially through a combination of GI Bill benefits and fundings from the University of Rochester to be able to come to business school without significant tuition costs. We also offer a program for U.S. citizens and residents that are residing in New York State, where we guarantee a minimum of $20,000 a year in funding. That's not a ceiling. There's certainly opportunities for additional funding beyond that, but it's a guaranteed minimum. What you should know for all of these opportunities that I mentioned, as well as all of our other named scholarships, award decisions are made by the admissions office. And so we're looking at what opportunity is the right fit for you and what will offer the maximum amount of funding for you relative to your qualifications. So these are not decisions that are made by outside organizations. Like I said, the outside private grants and scholarships are a completely different application process and one that is handled through those organizations. But the opportunities I just mentioned on this slide are ones that our admissions office is making the decisions on. It's not our financial aid office, it's our admissions committee, and that gives us the benefit of knowing you well, comparing you with other members of the enrolling class, and making the decision about what we think is your best opportunity for funding. Scholarship decisions, just letting you a little bit inside the world of the admissions committee before we finalize today's session and move on to questions. So admissions committee, when we're making scholarship decisions, it's always like the combination of looking at the forest and the trees. The forest being the entire applicant pool and having some level of fairness across candidates, but the tree being you and what makes you special and unique and different, and why would you be an amazing person to enroll in our class. There's a combination of qualitative and quantitative assessment that occurs. The quantitative, of course, is the very easy part that you can look at on any school's profile and say, what's my GMAT score, or level of work experience, or grades. That's very easy to quantify and compare across candidates. The qualitative, though, I need to emphasize that that's equally important for Rochester, and I would imagine for many other schools as well. It's not just your GMAT score. There's plenty of people that have high GMAT scores that are not admitted, and there's people that have average or even below average GMAT scores who are admitted. So the qualitative areas are going to get a lot of attention as well, and those are things that are going to stand out through your essays and your recommendations and your interview. Things like your leadership potential and your team skills, your interpersonal skills, your career focus and rationale for pursuing the MBA, and even what I would deem to be school fit, which is how does your background fit with the personality of the school and the typical strengths of the school and the type of students that that school enrolls. So those are all things that are nuanced, but that are going to also weigh into the decision. Decisions at Rochester for admission and for scholarship are communicated at the same time. The one exception would be scholarship weekend decisions, and so what happens for scholarship weekend is that we make a decision on admission, we make a decision on an initial scholarship offer, and if you're invited to scholarship weekend, you can come to campus for a weekend, and you're guaranteed a certain scholarship, but you're competing for additional funding. About 95% or more of the students who come get an increase. So there's a great upside potential. I basically tell students that unless you come and you really embarrass yourself and you're just using incredibly poor judgment in your interactions with us, it's highly likely that you'll get an increase. So just be mindful that you're coming and you're being evaluated, and you'll hopefully make great decisions and remind us of all the great reasons why we admitted you to the program and offer you more money. So hopefully a huge push for you if you're considering Rochester to get your application going if you haven't already, and work to finalize it by mid-February. So next steps for assignment MBA, we have a March 15th deadline, and that's kind of the stated deadline on our website. But as I said, there's that asterisk, which means if you're hoping to be considered for Scholarship Weekend, the deadline really is mid-February, because that Scholarship Weekend event is in, I think, the second weekend of April. So if you apply in mid-March, there's pretty much logistically no way that we'll get your application processed, reviewed, interviewed, and a decision with enough time to get you here to Rochester in early April. So mid-February is kind of that soft middle deadline. All you need to do to be considered is to indicate yes. There's not a separate application. And then again, just a plug to remember about the private and governmental funding sources, and a loan application through the FAFSA that you'll begin after you receive admission if you're a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. Okay, so that brings me to the closure of my comments, and like I said, we have 20 minutes of questions, so lots of time for questions. I see that there's already some questions that have come in, and so I'm going to start just going through the questions one by one, but here's a great opportunity to make sure that you have all your questions answered before we leave today. And if for some reason you have questions that aren't answered, or you'd like to dialogue about your individual background or your interest in Rochester, including my email, that's the best way to reach me. You can certainly call the office and talk to one of my esteemed colleagues, and we'd be happy to be a resource. But if you want to talk with me directly, I'm making myself available as your personal consultant, so to speak, to answer your questions and assist you in providing advice on your candidacy for the MBA program. So we will go right to question number 1, and I'm just going to read it real quick quietly, and then I'm going to read it out loud and provide an answer. So aside from financial aid directly from the schools and student loans, do you know of any resources specifically geared toward MBA students that aid in financing their education? So I've already mentioned a few of them. One is a consortium for graduate study and management. That's a great opportunity for funding specific for MBA students. The students that apply through the consortium have to show through past and present experiences that they are supporting the mission of the consortium. That is definitely one organization. NSHIMBA is another, National Society for Hispanic MBAs. TWIGO is another. These are all organizations that provide financing for students, but there's a lot of others. Like I said, I can't do the research for you. You need to do it for yourself, but there's a lot of organizations, and I don't mean like 5 or 10, I mean like hundreds that provide funding. So please go out there and do your research, and you will find that there are scholarships and grants that are out there. So question number 2 is, what kind of financial aid is available for international students other than scholarships? Are international students eligible for a loan? If so, what are the interest rates and how are you supposed to pay it after graduating or after you get a job? So it depends. Yes, there are loans that are available. Some of them are cosigner loans, and so you have to have a U.S. citizen or resident that is going to serve, and they have to be credit worthy. And the interest rate is going to depend on credit worthiness. And so, this is just like a home loan or, an auto loan or any other type of lending. It's going to depend on, the interest rate is going to depend on the terms. It's going to depend on your credit worthiness. And so you may have different individuals that are in business school, and they may have different terms for their interest rates for their loans. For the business schools that offer no cosigner loans, there's typically a standard interest rate that's known up front because the school is providing some sort of a guarantee if the student is to default. What often happens with loans that you might take during business school is that you will pay some sort of fees that will be bundled into the cost, and basically they'll slightly reduce the amount of money that you have that is available to you up front. These are basically loans that are unsubsidized, so you're going to start paying a little bit while you're in business school, but you're not going to actually pay on the principal. You may just pay on the interest. So the principal on the loan is not going to be accepted to be paid while you're in the program. And you'll typically have anywhere from 2 to 4 months, maybe a little bit more than that after you graduate before you have to start making payments. You'll have to determine the terms. Are you going to pay on a flat rate, the same amount every single month? Are you going to start with a slightly smaller payment and gradually increase that payment? There's obviously costs and benefits to doing so. If you don't have a lot of experience in what those costs and benefits are, I can promise you that an MBA degree will help you to clearly understand those financial benefits and costs and to make a more informed decision about what's in your best interest. But I think you'll find that most top business schools have placement rates, at least at 85, if not 90% or more of their students finding jobs within a few months after business school. So you're going to be in good stead in terms of making this investment in yourself. So question number 3 is, how much is your GMAT score a factor in financial aid? And I would say that's probably about the same that it's a factor in your admission decision. I don't think that it's going to be significantly different, meaning it's going to be considered. It's not going to be ignored. It's one of the few factors in your application that every single student has one, whether it's a GMAT or a GRE, and so it's going to be a topic of conversation. But there's students that have lower GMATs that are admitted and get scholarships, and there's students that have high GMATs that are not admitted. So it's by no means, at least at a top business school, it's by no means going to be the factor that gets you aid or that keeps you from getting aid. It's going to be one of those factors that's going to be in the mix. From a fairness standpoint, it's probably going to be something that's at least part of the consideration, because of course GMAT score is one of the few things that candidates sometimes compare with one another when they are sharing information. But it's by no means the only factor. Each year at Rochester we have candidates that have GMAT scores that are below our average that are not only admitted, but they're offered competitive scholarships. So I think sometimes students overthink that maybe their score isn't as competitive, and they actually set lower expectations than they should as to whether or not they would be competitive as a candidate. And sometimes you almost make the decision for the school by not even applying. So I usually encourage students, there's no harm in applying to the school. Let the school tell you no before you close that door and just decide that you may not get scholarship, and so you're not going to even bother to apply. So the next question is it better to wait until spring, which I think they mean spring of 2015, and apply for, next intake, or increase your chances for scholarship, or apply now with a good score and hope you'll still be considered? So if some of this is, looking at the opportunity cost of what's another year at your job going to look like, and is there really enough reason to keep you there? I think at the very least you're going to find that if you apply this year, there's going to be some good practice that goes into figuring out the application process and navigating it, and then you have a decision to make if you're admitted. Is the scholarship level significant enough for you to make that decision and go to business school? The last thing you want is to overshoot, think that you're positioned for greatness next spring and end up with nothing. So, better to find out that you're in the mix now, or if for some reason you're not, get some feedback on why you're not, and then you're better positioned for next spring. So I think strike while the iron's hot and get out there and see what your chances are for admission, and if you think you have a good score, you're probably going to be in the mix. As you know, it's not just a good score that's going to get you admitted or get you a scholarship. So it opens the door so that you're part of the consideration, part of the consideration set, and then it's going to be everything else that gets you admitted and gets you a scholarship, hopefully. So question number 5, when you're talking about initial costs, I saw some schools which do not charge an application fee. Do you think these schools might be more generous with scholarships, especially for international students with a not so strong financial condition? I don't know. I mean, there's probably some philosophy around whether a school is charging an application fee or not.
but I don't know that that necessarily translates into the size of their scholarship budget. So don't penalize the schools like Rochester that do have an application fee. We do sometimes waive it for candidates, sometimes both for need-based as well as for merit-based reasons. So that's certainly something that you can inquire to with a school if you find yourself in a financial hardship. But I wouldn't necessarily correlate an application fee size to the expected outcome for a financial aid package. There is some data out there both on school websites as well as places like Business Week and some of the other areas that will probably give you some indication of what an average scholarship package looks like or what the budget for financial aid is. And if you're not sure, if you're finding good information, go to the school and ask. The worst the school can do is tell you that that's not information they can disclose, but they very well may be able to give you some feedback, especially if you're willing to share some information about your profile as to what they think is in your best interest. I am always willing to tell a student what I think is in their best interest, because it's in the school's best interest to see competitive candidates apply. And so if you're competitive, I'm going to be encouraging and let you know. And if there's things that I think you need to do to become more competitive, I'm going to try to let you know that too, so that you can hopefully put your best foot forward when you go through the application process. So the next question is, how important is having a good credit score in the process of getting loans? Federal loans are not going to cover all the tuition at most business schools, so what can someone do now to prepare for the possibility of getting a private loan if needed? I agree completely. A federal loan is not going to probably cover all the tuition, and then you're looking at living expenses too, and you're not working during business school. So even if you have managed to accumulate some savings, it's probably not going to cover all of your living expenses. And so even if you get a generous scholarship, you're going to probably need to tap into some private loans. Some things that you need to be doing is paying any debt you have on time. That's a huge portion of your credit score. If you're not paying your bills on time, that's a serious liability and an indication that you're very close to not being solvent. So you need to be putting a plan together and a budget together so you can pay your bills on time. And doing so every single month, doing it consistently. Another part of your credit score is going to be based on how much debt you have. That's how much credit card debt you have and other consumer debt. It's based on, your broader debt to income ratio. So, you may not be able to completely pay down your debt. Having a car payment or an educational loan from undergrad may be part of the reality of the space that you're living in, especially if you're living in a city that is very expensive, like Boston or New York. That's the reality, that those might be debts that you're going to carry for a while. But at least be committed to making those payments. And if you are able to pay a little bit more of the principal every single month beyond the minimum payment, do that. And that's over time going to chip away at your debt to income ratio and put you in a better position. But I would say the number one thing is paying your bills on time. And also if you're having problems with your undergraduate debt, getting to somebody, whether it be through the federal government or a credit counseling agency, to figure out how you can get that back on track. Because if you're not able to access the federal loans because you're in default or you've had some sort of a judgment in the past, that's going to be a very precarious place relative to what the private lenders are going to be considering, in terms of your credit profile. So the federal government is pretty generous in terms of what they would consider and helping to fund your studies. So it happens rarely, but I have seen it happen, especially more in the past few years with the economy being the way that it is, with people who may have been unemployed for longer periods. So at the very least, you need to be in close communication and putting a plan in place where you can get back on track if you've had credit issues. So the next question is, I'm thinking about studying overseas. I know some schools take the direct loans, but I'm curious if you know if the grants and scholarships generally transfer over as well. If you have any suggestions as to how to fund an MBA overseas. I don't have as much experience in that process, and I definitely don't know, all of the nuances. I know that it's similar to an overseas student that's coming to the U.S. to study, though. There are some programs in some countries where it's kind of transferable and you can use it in different countries or different institutions, and there's some where it may not be.
So that's where you definitely want longer lead times. You want to take a look at what the school's websites say. There's a lot of information out there that will help. You want to get yourself organized. I'm a big fan of spreadsheets or notebooks or something that's going to help you to keep everything straight, because the last thing you want to do is go through an application process to a school that you just consider to be your dream school, and then you have no way to fund it because the financial aid is different than what you expected and there's not enough funding through the school scholarships or grants to be able to make it all work. So that's where starting early and being organized is going to be important. Ooh, next question is going to be a hard one. What's the average payback time for an international MBA student? I can only talk about Rochester, and I don't have the breakdown for domestic or international, but we have about 40 to 50% of our students coming from outside the U.S., so I would just say it's fairly consistent between our domestics and our internationals, and even our scholarship levels and our percentage of students on funding is pretty consistent. We do have a few international students who are sponsored, so they're not seeking funding, but that aside, the average payback is about 3.5 years, so very quick, and we're actually among the private schools in the U.S. When Business Week most recently ranked return on investment, we were #1 for U.S. private business schools, so something we're very proud of. The cost, takes into consideration your opportunity cost, the job you're quitting to come to business school, and that loss of income, your change in income after business school, the amount of money, the net cost you paid to come to business school, and your overall income trajectory. So good news there if you're considering Rochester, that whether it be domestic or international, there's a lot of opportunities to pay that back quickly and to recoup your investment and to feel like you're moving quickly toward paying down that debt and feeling as though you're significantly recouping that, both the out-of-pocket expense as well as the opportunity cost for being in business school. Next question, does work experience help in getting better scholarships? Probably yes, but it may depend a little bit from the school. The school sometimes gets, very nuanced scholarships or grants from institutions or companies or even from private donors, from alumni. They have very specific criteria. We want someone that has X years of work experience or X background or X career goals, and the school is required and obligated to meet the requirements of that particular type of funding. So you're better off to look at what the school profile is for admissions, and if you feel like you match that criteria, at least on some or most of the profile, and not the average, don't look at the average, look at the middle 80%. You can look at the average, you don't want to be below average in everything, but look at the middle 80% range, and if you feel like you're in the mix and you feel like the school gets a large percentage of students funding, then you're probably going to be in the mix to be considered for scholarships. The school's not going to just look at what your work experience is in terms of number of years, they're also going to look at the substance. So if you have 8 years of experience and you've been doing the same thing for 8 years and you've had no career growth, that's not necessarily better than having 3 years of experience where you've had career growth and you can show a compelling reason why you're pursuing the MBA, and you've had a lot of job autonomy and you have great recommendations where they say that you're a mover and a shaker and you're going to make an impact on the organization. Next question. 5 minutes left, so if you have questions, here's your last chance. What's the minimum score that Rochester looks at to consider for an offer of scholarship? I can't give you a minimum score because we don't even have a minimum score that we would consider for admission. We're going to look at everything. It's not just your GMAT. So there's students that are below, what I will say is there's students that are below our middle 80% that are offered funding. So that tells you that it's not just a GMAT score that's going to be looked at and considering you for funding. It's going to be a lot of other things in your application. So don't let your GMAT score or your opinion of your GMAT score or your GPA for that matter hold you back from applying or thinking that you would be considered for funding. You don't want to have an unrealistic expectation of yourself. If you have a 250 on the GMAT, you need to take the GMAT again. If you have a 350 on the GMAT, you need to take the GMAT again. You need to be able to show a minimum threshold that you can achieve academic success in a top MBA program. But our middle 80% is, I think, 620 to around 730 on the GMAT, and there's students below the 620 level who are offered funding. So, don't let your GMAT score or your opinion of it hold you back from being considered or from thinking that you'll be considered. If you think you have an overall profile that would be interesting and you can speak to that with confidence, then you should go ahead and apply and see where that application process takes you. Okay, we're getting a little bit in the weeds here, but I will answer this question because somebody was interested enough to ask it. If a student has CFA designation, can they claim credits toward 1 year of the accelerated MBA courses, or maybe some of the core MBA classes? No, the CFA by itself is not going to get you credit toward waivers or substitution of classes. We do have a few of our core MBA classes where you can either take a waiver exam or there's some sort of criteria from prior work experience that might consider you for a substitution. You won't outright reduce the credits that you have to complete the degree, but you might be able to take an upper level class as opposed to a core introductory class. The CFA certainly does provide some valuable training, but it's not considered a substitute for courses in our program. So next question, are there any full tuition scholarships available for internationals? Yes, there are. There are not any that are designated for any specific nationality or background. There are the different scholarships that I mentioned, our Assignment Leadership Fellowship. We have at least, I think, 1 or 2 of our first-year MBA students who are international, and several of our second-year MBA students. That's 8 or 10 students in our first and second-year program each year. But we also have some other named scholarships with either significant funding or even full funding, and several of the students in the program each year for some of those are also international. So we don't have specific quotas for the number of students that need to be domestic or international. We're going to look at our entire applicant pool to consider candidates. What I will say, though, any full tuition scholarships are incredibly competitive. It's something that you need to go into setting your expectations that there's not a lot of those available, and so it may end up being a portion of tuition as opposed to full tuition, but you should absolutely still put yourself in the mix if you think you're a competitive candidate. So I think the next question, I'm not quite sure what the question is, but the question is, when is the admission week that you mentioned in the presentation? So I'll mention 2 dates. One is the February date, which is the target deadline if you are trying to prioritize an application to be considered for the scholarship weekend that I mentioned that's in April. So if you are looking to finalize an application, I would pretty much say February 15th, which is a Saturday. You want to target having your application in no later than that, and we're rolling admission, so if you're serious, don't wait until February 15th. If you're ready to go and you can get your application in sooner, please do so. It will be reviewed. We do not wait until March 15th, which is the next stated deadline. However, if you can't get your application in earlier, or if you need that extra time, take what time you need to make sure that your application is competitive and thoughtful and you're putting your best foot forward. But I would say mid-February is really your timeline to make sure that you're going to be in the mix for the scholarship weekend. The scholarship weekend is April 11th, 12th, 13th. So we pretty much need a month to 2 months to not only get you your application processed, to get it reviewed, to get you interviewed, and to finalize a decision, and then still have enough time to invite you so that you can show up on campus with more than a week or two's notice. So mid-February, like I said, the 15th would be the target timeline if you want to be considered for scholarship weekend. March 15th is the next application deadline if you don't want to be considered for scholarship weekend, and the scholarship weekend is April 11th through 13th. So thank you very much for spending part of your day with us. I realize that we may not have gotten to all your questions, and so like I said, you're welcome to send me an email. I'm on email every single day, and would be happy to get back to you within 1 or 2 business days to help you learn more and explore the Rochester MBA program if you have interest. Good luck with your plans for business school, and good luck with your plans for financing your MBA. Have a great day. Bye-bye.